I never thought the happiest night of my life would turn into a public humiliation. At our engagement dinner, my fiancé's father looked me dead in the eye and called me a gold digger, and the man I loved didn't defend me. He laughed. I said nothing. I simply slid the ring across the table and walked out into the night. They thought I was defeated, but what they didn't know was that my silence was the beginning of a revenge that would cost them everything. My name is Elise, and for most of my life I've believed that hard work and kindness could open any door. I grew up in a modest neighborhood, raised by a single mother who taught me that love mattered far more than money. Every achievement I earned, from scholarships to my first steady job, came from persistence, not privilege. By the time I was 28, I had built a quiet but comfortable life, one where I could pay my own bills, support my mom when she needed me, and still dream of something bigger. That dream seemed to take shape the night I met Adrian. It wasn't some dramatic movie moment. We were introduced through mutual friends at a small gallery opening. He was charming without being loud, confident without arrogance. We talked for hours about books, travel, and our shared love of late-night diners. He made me feel seen in a way that felt rare and effortless. For someone who had learned to guard her heart, I found myself lowering my walls faster than I expected. Adrian came from a very different world. His family owned several successful businesses, the kind of wealth you only read about. He never flaunted it, and I never asked for anything from him. Our relationship grew on shared values. Laughter over fancy dinners, Sunday mornings spent cooking together, and endless conversations that made the hours disappear. He told me I was the first woman who made him feel grounded, the first who loved him for who he was rather than what he had. Over the next 2 years, our bond deepened. We traveled when we could, celebrated each other's wins, and weathered the small storms that life throws at every couple. Adrian proposed on a quiet evening in our apartment, slipping a simple but beautiful ring onto my finger. It wasn't the size of the diamond that mattered. It was the way his hands trembled when he asked. I said yes because I believed we were building something real, something unshakable. But love stories aren't always free of shadows. The first time I met his parents, I sensed a distance that words couldn't hide. His mother greeted me politely but coolly, while his father, Richard, offered a handshake that felt more like an inspection. They asked about my job, my education, my family. Questions that sounded casual but carried an edge. I told myself it was just protective parents being cautious. Adrian brushed it off, assuring me they'd warm up once they got to know me. Still, subtle moments lingered. A raised eyebrow when I mentioned my modest upbringing. A quick, tight smile when I insisted on paying for my share of a dinner. Comments disguised as jokes about how lucky I was to have found someone like Adrian. I tried to ignore them, but each remark left a small mark, like tiny cracks in a window that might one day shatter. By the time our engagement dinner approached, I hoped those cracks would finally fade. Adrian promised it would be a celebration of love, a night where families would come together. I wanted to believe him, but somewhere deep inside, a quiet unease told me Richard's approval wasn't as certain as Adrian wanted me to think, and that unease would prove impossible to ignore. The weeks leading up to the engagement dinner should have been filled with excitement, but instead I found myself replaying small, uncomfortable moments in my mind. Little things that, at first, I tried to dismiss. Like the afternoon Adrian's parents invited us to brunch at their country club. I wore a soft blue dress, simple but elegant, and as we sat down, Richard glanced at it and said with a thin smile, "Practical choice. Someone knows how to shop on a budget." Adrian chuckled awkwardly, gave my knee a quick squeeze under the table, and changed the subject without a word of defense. Another time, Adrian's mother, Lillian, asked about my job at the nonprofit where I work. I explained that I managed community programs and loved the chance to help families in need. She tilted her head and said sweetly, "That's adorable. But isn't it exhausting to work so hard for so little return?" Adrian's response was a quiet, "She's passionate about it," but he didn't challenge the implication that my work, and by extension my worth, was somehow lesser. It became a pattern. His parents would cloak their judgments in polite conversation, and Adrian would either laugh them off or redirect the topic. At first I told myself he was just trying to keep the peace. But as the comments grew sharper, the silence started to sting. One evening, we were out with a few of Adrian's cousins for drinks. Richard had apparently shared the story of how Adrian and I met, because his cousin Mark grinned and said, "Man, you must have some serious charm to land someone from the other side of the tracks." The table erupted in laughter. Adrian joined in, ruffling my hair like it was an inside joke. I forced a smile, but inside my stomach twisted. Later, when we were alone, I told Adrian how those moments made me feel small. He kissed my forehead and said, "Babe, you're overthinking it. They don't mean anything by it. My family just has a weird sense of humor." I wanted to believe him, but every laugh and shrug felt like a quiet confirmation that my feelings were less important than keeping his family comfortable. The closer we got to the engagement dinner, the more frequent the remarks became. Richard once asked if I planned to quit the charity work after marriage so I could focus on more productive things. Lillian suggested I let their family's accountant help me manage my finances once I joined the family, as though I couldn't handle my own bank account. Adrian brushed each comment aside with a smile and a "don't take it personally." But how could I not? Each word was a reminder that, in their eyes, I was an outsider, someone to be evaluated, not embraced. I tried to talk myself out of the growing dread. After all, Adrian and I were solid. He told me daily that he loved me, that I was everything he wanted. And yet, every time his father's sharp eyes lingered on me across a dinner table, every time Adrian's laugh filled the silence after an insult, I felt a small, quiet crack in the foundation of our relationship. As the night of the engagement dinner approached, those cracks widened into something I could no longer ignore. Richard's smirk during our last family gathering played on a loop in my head, like a warning I couldn't quite decode. Adrian promised it would be a night of celebration, but a whisper of unease followed me everywhere. I didn't know exactly what would happen, only that something was coming, and that Adrian might not stand by me when it did. The night of the engagement dinner arrived with the kind of polished elegance only Adrian's family could orchestrate. Their favorite restaurant had been transformed into a private dining room lined with white candles and crystal glasses that sparkled under soft lights. Waiters moved with quiet precision, topping off wine glasses and delivering delicate appetizers as if we were royalty. I wore a deep emerald dress Adrian had once called my lucky color, hoping it might carry a little magic into what was supposed to be a night of celebration. Adrian greeted guests with his usual easy charm, shaking hands, sharing quick hugs, laughing at every greeting. His parents stood like sentinels near the center of the room, accepting congratulations with a graciousness that felt more rehearsed than warm. Richard's eyes swept over me when I approached, his smile as sharp as a blade. "Elise," he said smoothly, "you look practical as always." I forced a polite thank you and moved closer to Adrian, who gave my hand a squeeze but said nothing. Dinner began with small talk and polite laughter. Plates of roasted lamb and herb potatoes appeared, and glasses clinked as toasts were made. For a while it almost felt normal. I let myself relax as Adrian told a funny story about how he proposed, the guests laughing along. But beneath the cheerful chatter, I sensed a tension, like static in the air before a storm. Richard's gaze lingered on me longer than anyone else's, his smirk growing each time the conversation turned toward our future. Halfway through the main course, he set down his fork and cleared his throat. The room fell quiet, every face turning toward him. "Well," he began, swirling the wine in his glass, "I suppose congratulations are in order. Adrian, you've always had, let's say, unconventional tastes. And Elise here has certainly made quite an impression on all of us." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Though I imagine the biggest impression might be on Adrian's bank account. A ripple of nervous laughter swept the table. My heart thudded. I looked at Adrian, expecting a quick defense, but he only gave a small, almost amused smile. Richard leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. "I mean, it's not every day a young woman from, what is it, humble beginnings, finds herself wearing a ring like that. Quite the strategic climb, wouldn't you say?" The word landed like a slap. Gold digger. He hadn't said it outright yet, but the meaning was unmistakable. My chest tightened, heat rising to my face. I waited for Adrian to speak, to cut through the tension, to defend me. Instead, he let out a low chuckle. "Dad," he said, shaking his head, "don't start." But the way he smiled, as if it were all just a harmless joke, betrayed everything. The room blurred around me. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and furious. In that moment, every subtle insult, every brushed-off comment, every laugh at my expense sharpened into a single undeniable truth. Adrian would never stand between me and his family. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached for my left hand and slid the engagement ring from my finger. The tiny scrape of metal against skin sounded louder than the clinking of silverware. Adrian's smile faltered as I placed the ring on the polished wood of the table, the diamond catching the candlelight one last time. "Excuse me," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I pushed back my chair and stood. The room seemed to hold its breath. No one moved as I walked toward the door, each step echoing in the sudden silence. I didn't look back. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing tears. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of rain. As the door closed behind me, I felt the weight of the evening fall away, replaced by something colder and stronger than heartbreak. They thought my silence meant defeat. They thought walking out was the end of the story. But they were wrong. That night wasn't the conclusion. It was the spark. And what followed would cost them everything. I drove home from the restaurant in complete silence, the city lights smearing across the windshield like streaks of cold fire. My phone buzzed over and over on the passenger seat, Adrian's name flashing again and again. But I didn't pick up. Each vibration felt like a desperate tug from a world I'd already stepped away from. When I finally pulled into my apartment parking lot, I turned the phone face down and let the buzzing fade into nothing. Inside, the quiet wrapped around me like armor. I kicked off my heels, peeled off the emerald dress, and stood barefoot in the middle of my living room. The humiliation from the dinner should have shattered me. Instead, a strange clarity settled in. Every cruel joke, every dismissive smile, every time Adrian had chosen peace over my dignity played in my head like a highlight reel. The more I replayed it, the less it felt like heartbreak, and the more it felt like a challenge. For the first few days, I did nothing but let the silence do the work. I ignored Adrian's calls, his texts, the apologetic emails that started with "you misunderstood" and ended with "please, let's talk." My friends came by, ready to comfort me, but I told them I just needed time. In truth, I needed distance, not just from Adrian, but from the version of myself that had once believed love could overcome anything. Adrian's family underestimated me. They expected tears, begging, a quiet return after a few days of sulking. I imagined Richard smirking over expensive scotch, certain that his little speech had scared me off for good. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence can also mean preparation. I started with small, practical steps. I removed Adrian from every joint plan we'd made, canceled the wedding venue, ended the lease application for the house we were supposed to buy, called my bank to secure every account that bore my name. Each task felt like a stitch in a new, stronger version of myself. I didn't need to yell or slam doors. My calmness became its own message. You will not break me. At night, when the world went quiet, the seeds of something darker began to take root. I thought about Richard's smug face, the way he'd said strategic climb, with a smirk, as if he owned the ground I walked on. I thought about Adrian's laugh, light and careless, as though my humiliation were a party trick. The more I replayed that moment, the more a single thought crystallized. This wouldn't end with me simply walking away. I didn't want dramatic confrontations or messy scandals. I wanted precision. Richard valued reputation and control above all else. Adrian prized comfort and the illusion of love. I would take neither with noise, but with quiet moves they wouldn't see coming. My silence would be the trap, my calm the disguise. When Adrian finally showed up at my apartment a week later, he looked tired and unshaven, his expensive jacket wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in his car. He pleaded through the door, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that his father had gone too far, that he only laughed because he was nervous. I stood on the other side, listening to every word, my heartbeat steady. I didn't open the door. I didn't give him the chance to rewrite the story. Instead, I began reaching out to people Adrian and his father didn't know I could reach. Contacts from charity events, whispers about Richard's less-than-legal business practices, small threads I could pull with quiet precision. Each conversation revealed more than I expected. Hidden debts, questionable partnerships, secrets they had guarded for years. I didn't need to shout or threaten. All I had to do was wait, gather, and plan. My silence became the storm on the horizon, unseen but impossible to escape. They thought I'd disappeared. They thought the ring on the table was the end of the story. But I was only beginning to write the next chapter, and every move I made from that moment forward would lead them exactly where I wanted them. Exposed, undone, and powerless. I began with information, quietly, carefully, and without a single dramatic flourish. Richard's business empire thrived on the illusion of perfection. Clean deals, spotless reputation, an endless string of charitable donations to polish the family name. But wealth leaves trails, and trails always lead somewhere messy if you know where to look. Through my work at the nonprofit, I had connections to city planners, accountants, and lawyers who occasionally whispered over coffee about the powerful people they couldn't stand. I started making calls, never revealing why I wanted to know more about Richard's properties, contracts, or partners. I asked small, harmless questions. People underestimated a woman with a soft voice and a broken engagement. Within days, I uncovered cracks behind the glossy exterior. There were zoning violations buried in paperwork, shell companies hiding questionable transfers, and a few philanthropic donations that looked suspiciously like bribes. Nothing that screamed scandal on its own, but together they formed a pattern that, if shown to the right people, could turn Richard's empire into a house of cards. The first move was subtle. I sent an anonymous package to a local journalist known for digging into high society corruption. Inside were carefully organized documents, property records, payment trails, copies of emails I'd obtained through a friend in City Hall. I included just enough to spark curiosity, but not enough to expose my involvement. The journalist reached out to me within 48 hours, his voice low and eager. "This is explosive," he whispered. "Where did you get this?" I simply replied, "Call it a concerned citizen," and hung up. While the journalist began his investigation, I focused on Adrian. Breaking an engagement left emotional scars, but I wasn't interested in hurting him with words. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had dismissed as a harmless laugh. Adrian worked in one of his father's subsidiary companies, a position handed to him more for his last name than his talent. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned about a key project his team was pitching, a high-profile contract that Richard considered crucial for expanding their business overseas. I reached out to a colleague at a competing firm. Over coffee, I casually mentioned that Richard's company might be facing compliance concerns, dropping just enough vague details to make them wary. By the end of the week, the competitor submitted a proposal so aggressive it forced Richard's team to slash their pricing and reveal weaknesses in their plan. Adrian's project began to wobble before it even reached the boardroom. Next came the social front. Richard's family thrived on status, charity galas, award dinners, and magazine spreads where they posed as the city's golden couple. I knew their next big event, a high-profile fundraiser for the very nonprofit where I worked. Months earlier, Adrian had promised to sponsor a table in our honor. I called the event coordinator and quietly withdrew my RSVP, citing personal reasons. Then, using a new anonymous email, I tipped off a few influential donors about Richard's questionable financial practices. Not accusations, just questions, carefully worded to stir suspicion. The night of the gala arrived, and I stayed home, sipping tea as messages lit up my phone. Friends who attended described the scene with glee. Donors whispered in corners, side eyes followed Richard and Lillian, and the journalist I had contacted circulated the room, notebook in hand, asking pointed questions about Richard's most recent property acquisitions. What should have been a crowning social triumph turned into a minefield of awkward conversations and quiet exits. Adrian texted me the next morning. "Did you do something?" I didn't reply. My silence was the answer. As Richard scrambled to contain the journalist's inquiries, more dominoes began to fall. The competitor I'd tipped off leaked news of their aggressive bid to trade publications, painting Richard's company as vulnerable. Investors grew nervous. One particularly damaging article questioned whether Richard's rapid growth strategy was sustainable given recent regulatory concerns. Shares in his privately held ventures weren't public, but the panic among partners spread quickly. Meanwhile, Adrian's once promising project collapsed under scrutiny. Internal emails, forwarded by a sympathetic employee I barely knew, revealed cost overruns and sloppy oversight. Richard's board blamed Adrian for the failure, and whispers about nepotism turned into open criticism. Adrian, who had once laughed as his father mocked me, now faced meetings where no one would meet his eyes. Through it all, I remained invisible. I never confronted them, never gloated, never left a single breadcrumb that could lead back to me. I simply watched as the careful web of wealth and reputation they'd used to belittle me began to unravel. Then came the article. The journalist published a detailed exposé outlining Richard's questionable dealings. Unregistered shell companies, suspicious property transfers, and evidence of bribery disguised as charity. It wasn't enough to bring criminal charges, but it was enough to scorch his name across every major outlet in the city. Partners pulled out of deals. Banks reviewed contracts. Invitations to elite events disappeared overnight. Richard, the man who once smirked across a dinner table while calling me a gold digger, was suddenly the one being dissected for motives and morals. His empire bled money by the week. Adrian tried one last time to reach me after the article broke. His message was shorter this time, stripped of excuses. "Elise, please. I need to talk to you. Everything's falling apart." I read the text once and then deleted it. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet erosion of power, the slow, steady cracking of a facade until the truth stands naked in the light. I hadn't raised my voice or thrown a single accusation. I had simply let their own greed, arrogance, and carelessness destroy them, one carefully timed push at a time. By the 7th week, Richard's businesses were under official investigation. Adrian's job was all but gone, and their once flawless social calendar was a wasteland of canceled invitations. And still, they never knew who had lit the first match. I didn't need their recognition or their apology. My silence had spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. In the weeks that followed the exposé, Richard's carefully polished world began to crack in ways even I hadn't anticipated. The first blow came from his own partners. Several key investors withdrew overnight, citing ethical concerns after the article questioned his financial practices. Deals that had seemed unshakable were suddenly on hold. Richard tried to spin the story as jealous competitors spreading rumors, but the numbers didn't lie. Clients quietly shifted their accounts elsewhere. Contracts stalled. The once smooth operation of his empire slowed to a crawl. Adrian bore the brunt of the fallout inside the company. His failed project, once dismissed as a temporary setback, became a convenient scapegoat for the board's growing panic. Whispers of nepotism turned into open criticism, and meetings that used to begin with warm greetings now started with cold stares and sharp questions. When I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Adrian had been asked to take an indefinite leave, I felt no satisfaction, only a calm confirmation that actions have consequences. Socially, the damage spread even faster. Richard and Lillian's names were once fixtures on every high society guest list. Charity galas, art auctions, black-tie dinners. Within 2 weeks of the article, invitations dried up. Friends they had entertained for decades suddenly became too busy to return calls. Rumors about hidden accounts and quiet investigations turned dinner parties into interrogation chambers whenever they appeared. Lillian, who had once looked at me with polite disdain, was now the subject of pitying gossip whispered behind perfectly manicured hands. Adrian tried to reach me again. This time it was a handwritten letter slipped under my apartment door. The envelope was thick with regret. He apologized for his silence, for laughing at his father's insult, for failing to protect the woman he claimed to love. He wrote that he never imagined things would spiral like this. He begged for a chance to explain. I read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer without a word. My silence remained the only answer he would ever receive. Richard, meanwhile, was fighting battles on every front. Regulatory agencies launched formal reviews of his properties. The journalist published a follow-up article exposing more questionable dealings, including a series of suspicious donations that now looked like attempted bribes. With each revelation, his grip on his empire loosened. His arrogance, once a weapon, now betrayed him in every public statement. Investors who had once admired his confidence now called it recklessness. I never confronted them. I never gloated. I went to work each day, smiling at my colleagues, helping families at the nonprofit, and quietly watching as the family that had mocked my worth crumbled under the weight of their own greed. Friends occasionally sent me links to news updates, expecting excitement or triumph. But I felt something different, a deep, steady peace. They had written the script of their own downfall long before I stepped into their lives. I had merely turned the page. When Adrian finally stopped trying to contact me, I knew the last thread had snapped. No more calls. No more letters. Just silence. The same silence he had once given me at that dinner table, now returned to him with perfect precision. Months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Richard had sold several properties to cover mounting legal fees. Lillian reportedly spent her days avoiding public appearances, claiming health issues to dodge social events. Adrian, once the charming heir to a thriving empire, had moved out of the city altogether, chasing small consulting jobs to rebuild what was left of his career. I never sought their ruin. I simply refused to let their insult define me. And in doing so, I allowed their own choices to destroy them. Karma didn't arrive with thunder or lightning. It arrived in quiet phone calls from lawyers, in canceled contracts, in doors closing one by one until the mighty were left standing in the rubble of their own arrogance. I walked through those months with my head high and my heart steady, knowing that silence had been my greatest weapon. They had underestimated me, and in doing so, they handed me the power to let their downfall unfold in perfect, devastating symmetry. Looking back now, I realize that night at the engagement dinner was never a tragedy. It was a turning point. They thought humiliating me would break me, that I would shrink, apologize, or fight for a place at their table. Instead, I chose silence. I chose myself. And that choice turned out to be far louder than any argument or outburst ever could have been. Richard believed money gave him power. Adrian believed love gave him immunity. Both were wrong. They taught me a lesson without even knowing it. People who underestimate your worth will eventually reveal their own. I didn't need revenge in the form of screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. All I had to do was step away, stay quiet, and let their greed, arrogance, and secrets do the rest. There were moments when I wondered if disappearing made me weak, but watching their empire crumble from a distance answered that question. Silence wasn't weakness. It was control. It was dignity. It was the ultimate response to betrayal. By walking away, I kept my self-respect intact, and in the end, they were left with nothing but the echo of their own cruelty. They thought I'd beg. Instead, I vanished. And in that vanishing, they lost far more than I ever did. What about you? Would you have walked away silently, or caused a scene in front of everyone? Do you think staying quiet is more powerful than confronting those who hurt you? If your fiancé laughed while his family insulted you, would you forgive? Or would you walk out and never look back? If you found this story as satisfying as I did, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next revenge story. Your support helps me share more true tales of betrayal, karma, and silent victories. Now tell me in the comments, would you have stayed quiet or gone out with a bang?